The Star Trek Concordance. This is episode 40.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casco, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
This week we're looking at one of the first fan-produced reference books about Star Trek. That fan was Bjo Trimble, and that book is the Star Trek Concordance. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casco. While the Concordance was published by Ballantine Books in 1976, it actually has a history that goes back further. We'll talk all about that today.
Yeah, but let's tell listeners how to find us first. Just go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/70strek. Feel free to leave us a comment or a question there, and maybe we'll get back to you. And you can also send us an email to 70strek@gmail.com.
You can also find the show on iTunes by searching 70s Trek in the podcast section. And if you leave a rating or a review, it will help other Trek fans find our show.
Kelly, did you know that the word concordance means, and here we go, an alphabetical index of the principal words of a book with a reference to the passage in which each occurs?
I'm so glad you got to read that, not me. But that's exactly what the Star Trek Concordance is. It's an episode-by-episode look at the original and animated series, basically all of what we knew of Star Trek in 1976.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, you kind of looked at the history of this book, kind of how it came about. Why don't you start telling us about that? Sure.
So the Concordance started as a fan edition of, this, book basically for Star Trek. So it was called Star Trek Concordance of People, Places, and Things back in March of 1969 when it was, I'm air quoting, published by Matham House Publications. But it was actually written by Dorothy Jones Heydt, and Bjo is credited as editing the book. So I'll get into a little quote from Bjo here in a second, but another interesting thing about this first edition, and I'm sure it carries through all of the editions, it was solely illustrated by fans.
Yeah, that's something that I thought was pretty cool in the book too, and I'll talk about that later. But yeah, there are no photos.
Yeah, no photos. It was all,
and here I am talking about it now. I said I would talk about it later, and I'm talking about it now. Okay. Kelly, before you go on, let me ask you a question. There were a lot of fan publications. This era was the beginning of fanzines. I mean, did you get the impression that this was sort of a fanzine to start with, and it grew into a total reference book?
No, it absolutely was a fanzine, and I'll call it a reference book. I mean, it's 80 some pages, 84 pages, and that is more than a fanzine. That's getting into the book realm.
But it started life as separate books, as separate editions, right? I'm sure you're going to talk about that, aren't you?
Yeah. I'll cover how it kind of came about and then go into some of the different editions before it got to the real published edition in 76.
Never mind.
Okay. So this was really the first reference book, and I'm again air quotes. It was a fanzine. Even Bjo calls it a fanzine, but really it was a reference book, and it covered everything from people actors who played each part. It covered alien species, air dates. It covered who the writers were. It did, and then it obviously went into a synopsis, a detailed synopsis of each episode. And you're going to cover that quite a bit, I'm sure, Bob.
Yeah.
Now, this first fanzine it only covered the first 2 seasons. So, this was published by Matham in '69. They only hit the first 2 seasons. Dorothy was taking tons of notes on 3x5 cards. She was watching the show. She was taking notes, as fast and furious as she could write, obviously, because there was no DVR to go back. Bjo,
and this was all just love of the series to begin with, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's amazing.
And no, I know. So Bjo saw all this work that she was putting into this and, talked to Dorothy, hey, let's combine our efforts, because Bjo then started pulling her information in with what Dorothy had, and they ended up with shoeboxes full of 3x5 index cards with all this information in. And, they even went, and I don't know, back in 68, 69, when they were doing this, they found early videotapes that they could go and watch.
What?
Yes.
How did they? Who had them?
I have no idea. It must have been a TV station or something. I looked all over.
That's amazing. So maybe, yeah, like you said, a local TV station. Wow.
Right.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, like I said before, it was officially on the cover of this fanzine was written by Dorothy and edited by Bjo. Now, in the interview that Bjo did in 2011, she kind of maybe sets the record straight. So let me read this quote. The Concordance started with a young lady taking copious notes on episodes as they were viewed. I started helping her. When she had shoeboxes full of 3x5 cards, I suggested that we put together a sort of an encyclopedia fanzine. But it began to take too long, and she lost interest. When we finally produced the Concordance fanzine, I was foolish in giving the young lady all the writing credit, which was not entirely true. For subsequent publications of the book, she had no input at all. And I'll get into the subsequent editions here in a few minutes. John, her husband, and I produced the first fan-published edition on an offset printer in our basement. If you wanted to purchase a copy and happened to be in town, you had to come to our house to collect your own book.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Isn't that? So that's when I first said quotes around Matham House Publications. Yeah, okay. Officially, I'm sure it's a publication or a company.
Were they doing
had to do that, right?
Were they doing a mimeograph copies in the beginning?
I mean it.
They
it's
had
an
to
offset
have, right?
print. So I'm not sure. I'm not a printing guy, so I don't know what an offset print press is.
I don't either.
But I, back then, I'm sure it was a mimeograph machine. So just kind of as a side note, I'm going to get into the editions here. But Dorothy went on, and she's also credited. And I thought this was kind of interesting. In Star Trek fandom, if you will, she is known as the creator of the first detailed Vulcan language. Let's talk about the different publications here. So we talked about the first edition. I keep doing air quotes, sorry, because it's, I don't know if I should or not, because it's Mathis House publication. But the first edition, like I said, was 84 pages and called Star Trek Concordance of People, Places, and Things. In 1973, Bjo and Bjo alone no, Dorothy, produced a supplement, and it was called the third season supplement to the Star Trek Concordance. Now, obviously, this included the third season of the original series, but it also, she took the opportunity to make some corrections. Now, I thought this was really neat. Also, she produced a coloring book. So she took all of that fan art and she just made it a coloring book, a 36-page coloring book.
It's just incredible. Isn't it incredible when you stop to think about these ladies were on the cutting edge of the Star Trek fanzine movement, creating, just creating this really interesting content and doing it at a time when doing so was very difficult.
Yeah. It was difficult, like we talked about, how do you print this? Today we just print it off of our computers. But
yeah, right.
But back then it was effort.
Big time effort.
Big time, right. 1974, now this gets a little contentious. Ruth Berman put out an additions and corrections to the Star Trek Concordance and Supplement.
And did she do this with their blessing, or was she just being kind of a jerk and said, hey, this isn't right, here's the corrections?
Well, she says it was just created for the general public, not for sale. She wasn't trying to, go and make money off it or anything. Now, Bjo says, I wasn't told she was doing it. And she's on the record as saying that Berman had a grudge with her and was trying to make her look bad.
There you go.
So,
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah. Now we get to the most popular version, which is the 1976 Ballantine book publication and it was simply called Star Trek Concordance. 256 pages. The important thing here is it had the 3 seasons of original series and the animated series. It was the first professional edition, obviously. So I'll stop doing air quotes from here on out. It was endorsed by Paramount for a little bit of time. But then they revoked it when the franchise released its own version, and they called it, kind of close, the Star Trek Compendium in 1981.
Right. So, and in fact, yes, the Compendium and the Concordance, two words that sound a lot alike. Paramount was trying to make some hay off of the Concordance.
Right.
Let's face it, if you're a young kid or a teen and you weren't paying that much attention in the mid-'70s and you come across a book called the Star Trek Compendium, you're like, oh, yeah, that's that book I heard about in the 70s. Well,
right.
No, it really actually isn't, but enjoyed it,
yes.
Go off and read it.
And I had the Compendium.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It came out, I bought it right away.
Absolutely.
Now you ask, why didn't we see more editions from Ballantine Books? They were concerned about the waning interest with Star Trek, in 76, 77, whatever. So they decided not to do a reprint. Go figure. They just weren't thinking.
Hey, Ballantine, I have one word to say for you. Go!
Whoops.
Yeah.
There goes your boat.
Yeah. Maybe another reason why you lost the contract to Pocket Books.
Yeah.
But we can talk about that later, too.
Right. The next edition didn't come out for almost 20 years, for 19 years. In 1995, there were 2 editions put out by Citadel in the U.S. and Titan in U.K. And this was called the Star Trek Concordance, the A to Z Guide to the Classic Original Television Series and Films. This didn't have a fun cover, unfortunately. But what it did have is not only the 3 seasons of the original series and the animated series, it had the first 7 movies and some key episodes from Star Trek Next Gen and Deep Space Nine.
I think that's really interesting how this book had some longevity. let's go back and talk about the original version of this thing. I'm holding in my hands here, listen, a kind of beat up copy, but I'm opening the front cover and going to the second page, going to the third page. Oh, there it is. And it says Star Trek Concordance, copyright 1976 by Paramount Pictures Corporation and Bjo Trimble. So there's that endorsement because Paramount did get involved. And then a little further down, it says manufactured in the United States of America, first edition.
Interesting.
October 1976, Ballantine Books, New York. But really what this is it's the first time that all of those editions that you had talked about were brought together in one big edition for a mass audience. Prior to this, as you said, they were being printed, with offset printing, and that's kind of a technique that uses it uses a plate. Newspapers sometimes they were done in the past with plates, and then that image is transferred to the paper from the plate. It's offset,
Okay.
Yeah, that
Gotcha.
kind of thing. Exactly. So anyway, this book was the first time it was sort of a mass-produced big full edition. So let's talk about this a little bit. Where I want to start is actually, I'm going to go section by section. One of the things that Bjo did was really kind of look at all of this episode content, and she wanted to break it down in a number of ways. So we start with the index of episodes by star date. And of course, I'm skipping over the introduction by Bjo and a preface up by Dorothy Heydt, and I'm jumping right into the content. So we start with the index by star date, which is really, really cool because this includes, again, both the original series and the animated series. Any guess, just take a guess, because I know you probably don't know. Any guess with the earliest star date? What episode is the earliest star date?
Now, she combined the animated and the...
Right.
Oh, boy.
It's okay.
You got me.
Right. The Magics of Megas 2, stardate 1254.4. Hey, look, I'm looking at the book. I didn't know that, so don't feel bad. And the next episode was Where No Man Has Gone Before, stardate 1312.4.
And she wouldn't have had the cage in this, right?
Right. I was going to bring up the cage. Yes. The cage, of course, is missing because it's more or less invisible to fans at this point in time. We know that there was something going on, and if you read Inside Star Trek by Whitfield, you know that there was a prior pilot that was chopped up and thrown into the menagerie, but that's really about all we know as fans. Nobody's ever seen a full version of it yet, so the idea that the cage exists as an episode is not possible at this time.
Yeah, like you said, invisible.
Yeah, I know it. That just sort of came to me.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your playing along with my ego. So the last star date in here is stardate 7403.6, and it is the animated series episode Bem. So we start with the Magics of Megas 2, and they're all in their regular original series uniforms, and we go to Where No Man Has Gone Before, and they're in the stupid-looking turtlenecks. And then we go back to Mud's Women after that. So it is interesting when you look at it by star date, because they're not how you think they would be. But, of course, the star dates, they weren't absolute.
Right.
The next thing we do is episodes in alphabetical order. I love this. She presents them in several different ways for us to think about them. So here are the episodes now in alphabetical order. So if you want to find your favorite episode, let's say it was Shore Leave. It's in the S's, and it's on page 44 here in the Concordance, and you can go find it. Very, very cool.
Does it reference there to a later in the book, like a page number or something?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're going to get there in a second. Now, you would think that would be next, but it isn't, because I was expecting it to be the next section, the episode summary section. What is next, though, is a section called fan art. And there are 13 pages of hand-drawn art by fans. So, for
example, like an intermission.
It's exactly like an intermission. So you're right. So I think what Bjo's telling us is, ooh, cool star dates. Check this out. And now your episodes by alphabetical order. But wait, before we get into detail, here's some nice fan art. So it starts with a nice pencil drawing of Spock. And I'm not being facetious, it's a great drawing. Pencil drawing of Spock. It's really, really good. And then there's a drawing of the fortress from the menagerie, from the cage, the Saw creature, Baylock's creature from the Corbomite maneuver, the rock guy with the claws from the Savage Curtain. There's also a Tellarite, Harry Mudd and his lovely wife, Nurse Chapel. I have to admit, it's a great picture of Chapel, but it's a very nice drawing of a woman who doesn't look a lot like Chapel. That would probably be a better way of saying it. But it's a really good drawing of a face. It just isn't Majel Barrett's. Then we've got young Spock writing on the back of his Sailot.
Oh.
Another drawing of Spock and T'Pau and the white gorilla thing with a horn from the Mugato. Yeah, and then there are just other sort of almost like you would draw a model with clothing, to show off the style of dress that maybe you're making it. There are sort of these kind of models in there by Bjo. Bjo drew these.
Oh, really?
Showing off the art or the uniforms, like you would on models. Yeah, Bjo drew the Romulan commander, another Romulan, a Klingon captain. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know she could draw, so she's got some art in here as well. We've got Evil Spock, we've got Uhura, we've got Zarabeth, we've got the Galileo as it enters the giant amoeba.
Yeah, hold on a second. Let's back up. Evil Spock.
Yes.
Come on.
Yes.
Come on. He's not really evil. He's just misunderstood.
The artist is... Oh, that's where you're going with this. Really? That's where you're going with this? We've got Misunderstood Evil Spock from the Mirror Universe, drawn by Tim Courtney.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Scott, Sarek, and the last image again is of questionably evil Spock from the Mirror Universe.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, now we get into the episode summaries, and she breaks them down by season, which is great, And they start with the order of the airing. So by air date is how they are presented in the book. So we start with the Man Trap, and then Charlie X, and so on and so forth. Where if you're a fan, you're kind of familiar with the order. There's a synopsis that looks to be like 1 or 2 paragraphs long. There's a list of actors and a list of what's really interesting is she also has a list of lexicon or vocabulary that is used in the episode. Right. Really, really interesting. So you have things like archaeological site or Barnhart or M113, planet M113, or the creature from M113, or Vulcan, or, tonsils, sturgeon, Saurian brandy. All of these things that sort of pop up in an episode, Bjo and Heydt are taking note of that, and they're putting it in here. So as you go through the episode summary, you'll see all of these, and there's like 2 episodes per page, unless there's a lot to talk about. And that follows through the first season, the second season, the third season, and then, of course, the other 2 seasons of the animated series. So when you're wrapped up with this, it's pretty in-depth. There are some fan art drawings occasionally peppered through here, but you don't see very many images, and there certainly are no photos. The next section that follows this then is the lexicon or vocabulary section. Now, this is to me is fascinating because you could stop the book at the end of the episode summary and you would have something pretty significant. If you were to stop the book right there, you're at like 118 pages. And for 1976, that's not bad.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. For a canceled TV show and a 2-season cartoon, that ain't bad. But then they dive into the lexicon. This is pretty amazing. This section is longer than the prior 4 sections that made up the book so far. It's 132 pages long. Very detailed. They really did their homework. I am very impressed by this section. And it's got just about everything that you can think of or that was mentioned. The eyes of Vol are in here. Imorgs. Fabrina. I'm just sort of running through things. Yeah. The SS Deidre. Dilithium crystals. Delta rays. Dr. Elizabeth Daner.
Jeez. Even in 76.
Yes.
Again, we still don't have VCRs that are, widespread. We still don't have DVR, obviously. And to get all of that information is incredible.
How the hell? The only thing I can think of is cassette recording was becoming more and more popular in the 70s. It was there in the late 60s, but it really started taking off in the early 70s. And so you could have a somewhat portable cassette player recorder, and maybe they recorded the episodes and just captured that audio and then listened to the audio over and over again, because it would be so difficult to sit there. Can you imagine trying to, as the episode was running and you had a pad and paper and you're like trying to scribble things down?
Yeah.
And then, it's here and gone. And then you're like, I've got to wait a whole nother 78 episodes before I can watch this episode again.
Fortunately, they were syndicating the crap out of this thing.
But again, you have to wait for 78 episodes to go through before you got to this one again.
Yeah. Calling the TV station.
Right,
hey, when are you going to do episode whatever again?
Right. So anyway, the lexicon section, very, very detailed. You have occasionally some hand-drawn art that pops up in here, but for the most part, it's all text, and it's all of the vocabulary that was in here. It's very, very impressive. Wow. John, Jahn, from the episode Miri, the pre-adolescent ringleader of the 300-year-old children with a chubby face and an unkempt mane of curly hair. I mean, that's the kind of detail they put into this thing.
Think about, what I covered with the the first Mathis House edition and then the supplement. That's 54 pages with those two. And then they added a whole nother more than 100 pages.
Yes. This lexicon is 132 pages. It's longer than the book up to this point. So the last entry, just so you know, is Zor-Khan, the Tyrant. A tyrant somewhere in the past of Sarapedon. Spock knows of him from history tapes, and Zarabeth is an innocent victim of his revenge on her family. And it's got some more there, but that's the last entry. So the last section of the Concordance, then, is an appendix of episode abbreviations. So throughout this summary, as you get into it, I'm looking at more troubles, more tribbles, more troubles, for example. There's a episode abbreviation. It is MTT/A. More troubles, tribbles. And then the /A refers to animated.
Right.
And, of course, in the regular original series, they don't do that. They just give you EM, for example, for Errand of Mercy. So the very last page of the Concordance, then, is a listing of all of these abbreviations. Now, all it does is give you the abbreviation. So there's AE, and then it tells you what page it's on, page 70, but it doesn't tell you what AE stands for. So this is the one part of the concordance that I could rip out, throw away, and do okay with. I was a little confused why they went so far and cared so much about the abbreviations. And the only thing I can think of is somewhere along the line, they needed to do this on note cards.
Right.
So they probably did the abbreviations for themselves. Hey, this is from Errand of Mercy, EMM. And so that helped them keep everything straight, and it just came forward from all of that research into the book. But nobody ever stopped to say, does this really mean anything to anyone reading the book? Because it doesn't. It's not necessary. So I think that little piece of researchers, shorthand got put into the book, and there's no real reason for it.
Oh, it's more for them than
anybody else. Yep. There's one last thing that I kind of want to talk about, and you mentioned it earlier on, and that is the cover. When you open up the front cover and the back cover together, sort of spread them apart and lay them down on the desk, it is it is a look at the Enterprise as if you're looking down from above it. So you're looking down upon the Enterprise. The saucer section takes up the front cover. The engineering section and the nacelles are on the spine and the back cover. All right, so let's look at the front cover. Now we're looking at the circle of the saucer section. Directly in the middle is the bridge, because we all know that the bridge sets on the raised area right directly in the middle of the saucer section. Bam. There's a small rivet that goes through the middle of the bridge. And behind that rivet, I should say, it's attached to a circle, a cardboard circle on the back inside of the front cover. All right, so you've got 3 windows, actually 4 windows. One window is on the right side of the cover, so you can grab that little wheel, and then you can spin it. On the left is a little window, and it's called title, and that is the title of each episode. So you can spin the little wheel that's behind the front cover, attached to the front cover with the rivet, and you can find through that little window the title of the episode you're interested in. So now, let's just say
every episode that's covered in the book?
Yeah. So let's say I want to go to Spock's brain. There's Spock's brain. And I want to know, well, what page is it on? Well, guess what? There's another little window that's lined up. And again, on that wheel is a notation. It's on page 74. Isn't that cool? But yet the fun doesn't stop there. Also, another little window gives you the star date.
No.
So you've got the star date, you've got the title, and you've got the page number where you can find it. So if you quickly have some question about Spock's brain, boom, you've got the star date. I can go to the page number. I can find it very, very quickly. Oh, but wait, there's one more little window. That last little window, any idea what it is?
Let's see.
It is the abbreviation, the episode abbreviation. This is really why I wanted to save it for last.
Okay.
The last little window is the episode abbreviation. So as we're looking at Spock's brain, of course, it is SB. Now, for people buying this book, oh, that's cool, Spock's brain. It's stardate 5431.4. Oh, awesome. It's on page 74. What the hell is SB? I don't care. I'm going to page 74 and I'm going to have fun with the book.
Right.
But that's it's very, very cool. It's that little wheel design. I'm sure you've seen things like that from kids' books when you were younger, but it is used here in such a way that is really unique. It's really kind of grabs you, but it also delivers you back to an earlier analog day when we were kids. Before computers, before looking up things on Google, before looking up things on our phones. This was big time tech at one point. To have a little book that did this with this wheel, this is very cool for 1976. Very ingenious. I'm so happy to have this. I really, really am. It's not anything that I pull out often, but I got to tell you, this is, to me, is like an artifact from the 70s. And this kind of sums up for me what the mid-'70s and Star Trek were all about. It's all right here in the Concordance. We did mention it already. The cage is missing. We know that. It's not in there. There are also a few other little mistakes. So, for example, in the episode The Day of the Dove, Bjo leaves out the female lead Klingon. That actress was Susan Howard, and she's nowhere to be seen in here. And in fact, what's really interesting is that this mistake goes forward into the Star Trek Compendium. Hey, Paramount, were you cheating a little bit? Look at the Concordance much? And in fact, poor Susan Howard was left out all the way until the second edition of the Compendium. Finally, somebody said, hey, she was kind of a big deal in that episode.
Just a little?
And I just have to throw in this tie. If you were a Dallas fan, you will remember Susan Howard because she played the wife of Ray Krebs, Donna Culver Krebs. And she was on Dallas for many, many seasons.
It's ironic that Paramount and the franchise is pushing the Compendium as their own version, but really they used Bjo's work as the basis of what they did.
They sure did, didn't they?
Oh yeah, and she had to be somewhat bitter about that, all that work that she did.
Yeah, a lot of work. I just had one more thing to say here to wrap it up. We talked with Richard Arnold, if you remember, way back in. Okay, I don't want to say the episode number because I don't remember. But when Richard Arnold was volunteering at Paramount, there were only 2 books that office could find that even referenced the original series. The first was what Kelly and I call The Book, The Making of Star Trek by Stephen Whitfield. But the other book, the only other reference, was Bjo's Star Trek Concordance. I mean, isn't that kind of a head scratcher that here you are in the offices that produced the original series, and yet you're kind of depending on Bjo and this reference book that started as a fanzine.
Yeah, I mean, and you got Richard Arnold, who's got the eidetic memory, who can remember everything he ever saw or heard or anything, but he's still using these books as, Bibles, basically.
Yep, right, exactly. Probably one of the best compliments, though, that was ever given to Bjo and the Concordance that she could have ever gotten was that she was acknowledged by the authors of the Star Trek Encyclopedia and the Star Trek Spaceflight Chronology in the 90s as a Star Trek research consultant. And that really tells you how much she really did and how much she was thought of, how much her work was thought of later on. And I couldn't help but think, Kelly, that, like Doug Drexler, Bjo Trimble was a fan in the 70s who became a super fan.
Definitely. She was part of that foundation that everything else was built on.
Next week, we talk about the man who designed the original Enterprise, Matt Jeffries.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.